Yeah, welcome back to the afternoon session. We have a really excellent presentation from Scott Landis from, as you say, across the pond. We have the poll, which is now operating live, and if you could please fill that in. The question is, if you could change one thing that you would like to see in the future based on the US experience, what would that be? We also have the questions and your opportunity to put questions in, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Scott Landis, well, what can I say? CEO of Rhino Marking and Protection Systems and Infrastructure Resources, the organizer of the annual US Excavation Safety Conference, and recognized as an industry expert with a passion for excavation safety. A long list of achievements, I've picked a couple out. He co-founded the Oceania Damage Prevention Conference, created the annual Excavation Safety Guide, which has had over 10 million published copies. So somebody who is an absolute expert in this field, and I'm sure we'll really enjoy listening to. So I'd like to hand over to Scott. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate it. So as you can see, what my session is about there, what's really, really important is collaboration. At least over here, that's what makes things tick. And why is collaboration so important and damage prevention important? So preventing those kinds of disasters is what probably everybody who's attending this is really most concerned about. And that does take a lot of collaboration. So you can tell here in the US, that number on the screen, over 18 million miles, is it's about 4 years old. So it's probably a lot bigger now, but that's how many miles of pipelines and cables are underground here in the US, and that equates to one American football field full of cables and pipes for every man, woman, and child in the US. So it's a problem that's massive, and it keeps getting bigger. None of it gets taken out, and more gets put in every day. So here in the US, we have an organization called the Common Ground Alliance that creates an annual report on damages called the DIRT Report. And actually, the 2019 numbers just came out a few weeks ago, and we had 532,000 damages here in the US last year in 2019. That was up 4.5% from 2018. And, you know, the best guess for the reason is that last year, there were more inquiries per construction dollar spent. So really that kind of translates into a little bit more stress on the system. And I'll get into a few of the details from that report a little bit later on. So last year was also tracked in this DIRT report that we had in the US nearly 23 billion pounds of societal damage costs. And so what that really comes down to is, you know, traffic delays, people missing work, businesses shutting down, all the collateral damage that happens when there's a damage. And I mean, that's a pretty crazy number. So it really has people's attention. In Canada, they actually started tracking it several years ago more closely, and they have typically about 600 million pounds of societal damage costs. So now there's the problem. Obviously, what are we going to do about it? We all know about the problem, and the scale of it is massive, right? So here we have regulations at the federal level, which means PHMSA in the US, which is our pipeline safety branch of the government. In Canada, they have the Canadian Regulatory Group. We also have kind of our equivalents of your HSE, OSHA, and WorkSafe in the US and Canada. They all have laws and regulations that theoretically should stop these damages from happening, right? Then add to that 50 states and the provinces in Canada all have individual laws on top of that. Then over here, especially, we have this thing called civil liability, which is big dollar signs. When you screw up, somebody's suing, and they're probably suing everybody who has a dime. So there's all kinds of financial costs when there's damages, but we're still having damages, right? So while those are important, they're not solving the problem by themselves. So here's a few examples of real world accidents and the ramifications. This data can be hard to get because the litigation takes forever and nobody will tell you anything about it until the litigation is resolved. But this was a horizontal directional drilling disaster that the damages were almost 70 million pounds, but it was caused because the contractor failed to expose a line prior to crossing it. When they're doing that directional drilling, most of them are good contractors, but the ramifications, if you don't take the right steps, are huge. Worse, this is the case where someone died and 6 were injured. I mean, and you can still see massive financial costs along with that. But really, I think probably everybody involved in the industry over here and there are really what's motivating us and making people passionate is preventing the the injuries and the deaths, number one. So in this case, the contractor exposed what he thought was the gas line and bored under it. Problem was that was an abandoned line, and when they bored under it, they hit the live gas line. And so if you don't dig down deep enough, or expose, I should say, all the way down to the depth that you're boring, this is a risk that can lead to disaster. Another one where sadly someone was killed and 4 were injured. And this one was one of those that really crazy because the contractor did not submit an inquiry, and there were even some marks on the ground, and they ignored those. And again, you can look at the huge financial costs there. And on top of that, the city that this took place in, it was like 61 million pounds in economic loss on top of the horrible loss of life. And here's kind of the last example. This was really sad. It was a contractor read the map upside down. And so they went ahead and excavated, and they hit a water pipeline, and their own crew was further down the construction site, and they had 2 people inside the pipeline. And so when they hit the pipeline, the water rushed down and actually drowned 2 of their own team. And so they actually, the foreman was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. So again, we've got all these things in place that should be stopping it. But what we really believe here is that the real solution is, to save lives through education. And here in the US and Canada, there's really nowhere where that's mandatory, right? There's nobody requiring education. The exceptions are some states have penalties when you violate their state laws, that instead of paying a fine or in addition to a fine, depending on the state, you can take a training class on damage prevention and excavation safety. So there's also a couple cities that I know of that actually require, as a part of the permit process, you can't get a permit to dig in the city unless you take, pretty simple, I think it's about an hour damage prevention excavation safety class, which seems to me a real simple solution. Now, it's not going to work everywhere, but education is the answer. So here, the other thing, and I'm sure it's the same there, is what really motivates individual people to get involved and to try and stop damages and make excavation safe. It's really all about passion here. It's everybody you talk to that is super involved in our industry is doing it because they're passionate about saving lives and excavation safety. So one thing we've done at Infrastructure Resources to try and foster that and encourage that is in our quarterly magazine, the DP Pro, we always feature what we call a damage prevention hero. And it's interesting because it can be anybody from a higher level person to a locator on the street that can be nominated and get this. The funny part is, I should say, is that most of these people, they don't want the attention. They don't want accolades. They're doing it because they're passionate about it. So from our perspective, we try to make it fun. And the person who is the damage prevention hero has no idea that they are until the magazine lands on their desk and they flip through it. And I was fortunate one time, a guy from BP got it, and I was actually at a conference that he was at when he got the magazine, and it was really pretty funny to see his reaction. But we do that because we think they deserve publicity, and because obviously we hope that it motivates others to be passionate. And here's a couple other examples of kind of this individual passion that really drives us over here. So on the left is Victor Espinoza. If you're into horse racing, you probably know who he is. He won the Triple Crown, and he's won, I think, 3 Kentucky Derbies in a row, wearing 811 and promoting that call before you dig number here. And again, the reason for bringing it up is this started out of passion. A couple guys who work for our one call center in Northern California happened to have a passion for horse racing, had a connection, and said, hey, what if we did this? What if we got a jockey to wear 811 with all the TV coverage and things? And so they pursued it, and they got others involved, and they got the Common Ground Alliance to help them spread the word to raise money. And it was phenomenal, the exposure it got. The next one over is a contract locating company that just decided, hey, what if we get a hot air balloon? And sure, they're getting publicity for themselves, but they volunteered to pay for it all and put 811 on the balloon, and it got tons of exposure as well. And last one on the right, Joey Logano is a NASCAR driver. In fact, he's now in the final 4 to win the whole thing this year. And that was back probably 5 or 6 years ago. And he was literally like 18 or 19. But as you can see, he's promoting 811, and it all came about because those 2 women from Florida and Georgia were part of a group that got him to be a spokesperson for 811. And he eventually ended up on the Shell team, and Shell has been great about putting 811 on the car a few times a year. Again, individual passion. This one is, here we have a lot of problems with crossbores. And for those, that picture illustrates it really well, but for those who don't know, when people are boring in, say, anything, but in this case, a gas pipeline, sometimes they go right through a sewer line. And a lot of times here in the US, the sewer lines are not locatable, and people don't locate them. So they don't even know that they've gone through the sewer line. And then all of a sudden, somewhere down the line, the homeowner has their sewer back up, and they call somebody out to clean it, and they put a drill down there because they think it's a tree root, and they hit the gas line, and the gas leaks back into the house and can explode. And it's crazy. There's some estimates of several 100,000 of them out there, and 3 per mile taking place when this kind of work goes on. That was actually what we believe caused that explosion you saw in the beginning. But the reason I put this up here is, again, this individual passion. There's a guy named Mark Bruce who had been in construction his whole life, and then in working with vacuum excavation and seeing this kind of damage going on out there and this risk. So he and a few others formed this Crossbore Safety Association, all volunteer, and their whole mission is to reduce the risk of crossbores. And they published a leading practice for risk reduction, but it's just amazing. Individual people just take it upon themselves. This is another example of the same thing, and from the standpoint of an organization that is focused on stopping damage to basically submarine cables and pipelines. Their main focus is pipelines because the repercussions are so big. There were actually 25 fatalities between 1987 and 2007 with damages caused to submarine pipelines. So that's horrific. But again, kind of the point here is this guy, Ed Landgraf, He helped start this when he was with Shell with some other pipelines, and he's retired and he still does this for free. I mean, and then you can't define passion much better than that. Another group, the the North American Telecommunications Damage Prevention Council, nice simple name, is a group of competitors. As you can see, those of you familiar with the telecommunications industry, all of those people compete with each other, but they put that aside and they get together and focus on preventing damage to the nation's infrastructure, especially telecommunications. And it definitely makes a difference. Another thing, this is an infrastructure resources initiative, but I'm sure they're at the same thing. Locators are just critical to excavation safety, right? If they don't do a good job, it doesn't matter if somebody put in an inquiry and got a plan, right? If they go out and locate it poorly, everything can go wrong. So here anyway, they tend to get a lot of grief and not a lot of accolades, and they're out there working their tails off. Here anyway, they work really long hours. They're not paid very well, to be perfectly honest, in most cases. And it's a skill. This isn't like you pick up a locator and go out and do this effectively. It's a skill. So we decided they needed some encouragement and they needed help staying safe. So we created this Locator Safety and Appreciation Week, and provide a whole bunch of free posters and cards and ideas on how you can, during that week, show appreciation for the locators and help keep them safe. And it's been phenomenal how many locating companies, but pipelines and a lot of people jumped in and done this. And so if you want to use any of those free tools, they're on that LSAW website. Another, again, passion, self-started thing. Big, huge utility in California, Pacific Gas and Electric, who gets lots of bad PR, but from my personal experience, they work their tails off to keep things safe. And I just think they're the victims of circumstance a lot of the time. But one of the things they did was they created what they called a gold shovel standard, where they made contractors who wanted to do work for PG&E had to meet these safety standards. They looked at their training for damage prevention and excavation safety, and it had to meet their standards or they couldn't work for them. So then they took that and they actually converted that to a nonprofit and kind of gave this gold shovel standard to a group to go out and pursue. And the idea is to go out and get contractors to have to get this gold shovel standard to do work for cities or utilities. And it seems like a great mission. It's also pretty controversial here just because it's a forced thing on contractors. But again, it's that passion, and the big picture is they're trying to prevent damage. 3 other quick passion things. Again, it's like this PASA, the Pipeline Ag Safety Alliance on the left, an initiative we started at Infrastructure Resources that we found out, actually one of our Rhino employees found that here we have these county ag extension agents. So they're basically consultants paid by the university systems, and they go out and talk to farmers about everything under the sun to be better farmers and to be safer. And we found out that farmers really respect them. So this program goes out and educates these people who are educating the farmers. So it's been super successful. And then another area where we have big damages in our area is drain tile. When they're putting in drain tile, they frequently cause damage. So another group just popped up of basically volunteers and created a drain tile safety coalition to get that message out. And the third one is another group of kind of pipelines that got together and said, hey, we need to get a message directly to the farmers. So they approach it that way. So you got 3 people all out there trying to prevent damage. Then we have our one-call notification centers here, and they are super tied into damage prevention, and they're also super creative. They come up with the best ideas ever for promoting damage prevention, and 811 or clickbeforeyoudig.com in Canada. So we have those in pretty much every state, and not all of them are as involved as others, but it's amazing. They are the heart and soul of damage prevention here. And this is a quick example of, actually, this is a video created here at Rhino, but it's not for profit, right? We purely to promote damage prevention, and a lot of people do this. So I'll quick let you take a look at this.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
What?
I don't see any locate flags or like paint markers around. Did you call 811?
Why?
There's underground utilities everywhere. There could be cables, pipelines. You know the number you call when you dig, 811?
No, we'll be fine.
Dude, it's the law.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't want to do anything wrong.
Yeah, I don't want to break the rules. There could be consequences.
Okay, I'll call. But can you help me move this first?
Sure. Feels good to be doing the right thing.
So anyway, just an example of having a little fun, but trying to get the message out there. And again, totally driven by passion and trying to save lives, because there's no financial incentive to it. So then quickly, 811, our national number for calling, started in May 1st, 2007. And the important part about that is prior to then, it was pretty much impossible to have a national damage prevention kind of education program, because every state had a different number. In fact, some states had more than one phone number to call before digging. So if you were AT&T or a big pipeline that ran across the country, you couldn't really have a standard message unless you just rattled off all the phone numbers of 50 states and the extra ones. So this was an awesome thing that the Common Ground Alliance here pushed, got a legislator in the state of Louisiana to push the legislation through, and it's made a massive difference for education. The CGA also has a best practice, all kinds of best practices for excavation safety. A great tool, free, available to everybody. Probably the only drawback is the plus is it's done by consensus. So every stakeholder group here has a representative that votes on this on every word. But as we all know, the one catch with consensus is it typically you have to end up with a little bit of a watered down end result to make everybody happy, but it's still a massive leap forward. This is also that dirt report I was talking about that the CGA does, and over 500,000 reported damages through this program. It's all voluntary, and the information regarding who submitted data is not disclosed to anybody. So we had originally, when this was trying to be put together, some utilities said, oh no, I'm not putting my damages in there because I don't want the finger coming back pointing at us. And so it's all anonymous. It's in there by industry and by all kinds of categories, but not by company name. So this is a real quick breakdown on the data in that dirt report. This is the 2019 report that just came out. You can see that really, if you take out the unknowns, 22% of the damages are caused by no locate request. And that seems pretty crazy to think about. That's over 100,000 damages were caused by somebody not requesting a free locate. Then if you look over on the other side, it gives you a breakdown on the kinds of work being done and who did it for the damages. This is an interesting number, because what this says is that if someone requests a locate before they excavate, there is less than a 1% chance there's going to be damage. It seems pretty simple, doesn't it? I mean, that it's, at least here, it's free, get that done. It's crazy not to do it. So in Canada, they tried to get 811 approved as a national number like we had in the US. The catch is, it turns out 811 was already taken in Canada. It was a national health information number. It wasn't really used at all, but they just couldn't get it done. So actually now, as it turns out, unfortunately with COVID, the 811 number up there does get used all the time now. But kind of the good news for Canada is, as a result, one of their key people up there, Mike Sullivan, who runs their Alberta One Call and also is the executive director of the Canadian CGA, and just like the epitome of passion, right? There's nobody in Canada or probably the US more passionate about damage prevention. So he pushed through this clickbeforeyoudig.com, and as it turns out, the statistics are coming in. It looks like there's no definitive data yet, but it sure looks like in the US or in Canada at least, when a locate request is done online, it's much more effective than on the phone. There are less damages per locate request when they're done online. So it's an interesting thing. And because they couldn't get 811, they developed this and pushed this. And as a result, they have something like 90% plus in most provinces of online requests. And it's going up in the US, but I think it's probably on a national average a lot closer to 60 or 70%. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise not to get 811. So with all this going on, why are we still having problems? Well, some of the opinions and reasons are membership in these one calls in each state and province is not always mandatory. Thanks to lobbying for special interest groups, I'm sure that doesn't happen there, some groups are excluded in some states. So, of course, shockingly, those groups that are excluded tend to be where a lot of the damages are, or they cause a lot of the damages. Another big problem is that our laws don't match reality in many cases. For instance, in most states, it's typically 48 hours or 2 business days utilities have to do a locate once an inquiry is submitted. In some cases, that just can't happen because all of a sudden a big telecommunications company might come into a metropolitan area and start this massive putting fiber in the ground project, and they haven't told anybody in advance. And so all of a sudden now the locators in that city, they simply don't have enough locators to go out and get the locates done in 48 hours. And so we're working on trying to match reality with the laws here. But unfortunately, there's not any unbiased national effort to change. The CGA does a great job in a lot of areas, but some contractors really feel that they're kind of run by the gas industry and they're not involved. And it's really not true. Anybody can get involved, but there still just isn't a perception of a big national organization to try and make dramatic changes here. So what can we do? And the first thing is, if you look at that statistic that if you request a locate, there's less than a 1% chance of damage, that seems like a great place to start. So we really advocate using permanent markers. If you get somebody to make that locate request, you're down to that less than 1% of a chance of damage. And locators help markers help the locator do a locate faster. And they're also kind of that last line of defense. If somebody has not called in or requested an inquiry online and they're about to excavate, a permanent marker is the last thing that can tell them, hey, go ahead and request a locate. And if they don't, the last thing is there used to be marked, or there's still marking tape, but there's now actual products that will resist a backhoe. So it'll come out of the ground and warn the backhoe operator that there's something there. So that's kind of the last chance. But to me, it's crazy not to spend that kind of money in the beginning versus the risk of somebody getting hurt and the financial cost of a damage. So where's this education really taking place? Who's doing it? Well, the one call centers here, again, they're really hugely the backbone of education and getting the message out. Not every one call does, but this is some examples of some of the states and provinces where they are really aggressive about education and really making a big difference. We also have our DP Pro magazine and dppro.com website that is, you can subscribe digitally for free and get on, but it's as you can tell by the name, totally focused on damage prevention and educating people. So that's a great tool. As Bob mentioned, we have an excavation safety guide that is annual, and this one's really aimed at the excavator. And you can buy those, but it's also online because we want people to be safe. Also mentioned the Oceanic Conference. We started that with a partner in Australia, Pelican Corp, 2 years ago. Was supposed to be this year again, but COVID canceled that. But phenomenal, and it's like, especially me coming, so many Americans, unfortunately, they think that we have all the answers. Well, it's very clear we don't, right? We can learn from everybody. And so the more time I spend, internationally, it's just always awesome to see great ideas coming from all over the world. And this kind of came because a lot of Australians come to our national conference every year, and I got to know them and said, well, this is crazy. We should have something in Australia, and everybody learns from everybody. And it's really a global effort. Speaking of global, our Global Excavation Safety Conference is going to be the end of March, of course, hopefully in Tampa, Florida. They're hosting the Super Bowl, so we're thinking it'll be about the cleanest, safest city in the world just before that. So we think we're still going to be able to have it live. Also having the 2022 one in Phoenix in March. And then in the New World Order, as we're doing a virtual event today, we are launching our virtual version of the Global Excavation Safety Conference next year in April. So that might be enticing to some of you over there, because obviously it works well no matter where you are in the world. We also started Damage Prevention Week, which is aimed at getting the spotlight on damage prevention at every stakeholder group during 1 week a year, trying to encourage people to take that week and meet and plan and work on things so you can improve damage prevention. We think it's really important to have a focused spotlight for a period of time, like our Locator Safety Awareness Week. And so got a really good response. We've got a global GPR Congress taking place that week, and a Cross-Border Safety Association course, and that CAMOS meeting, and they're all meeting in Tampa at our Damage Prevention Week. But again, we encourage it regardless if someone can come to Tampa, just to pick that week every year to have internal meetings and discussions on how to move the ball forward. And we also started a Global Locate Masters competition. So there is now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it over there, but called Udo, and it's augmented reality, I guess is what you would call it, but unbelievable tool for training, locating. But also what's great about it is it's great for competition because it's a total level playing field. And so this is, you can do it indoors with a locator, and I have tried to learn locating before, and it really wasn't clicking. It's just not how my mind works. But when I did it with this Udo, it was awesome because I could see exactly how the signal worked and why it worked. And not that I'm a good locator now, but at least now I get it. And then early next year, we're also launching the Excavation Safety Alliance, which is a kind of a membership platform where all of our content from magazines and videos and podcasts are all going to be available on this membership site. So it's actually there now. The Alliance does, the content is not there, but if it sounds interesting, you can go there and register your email and you'll get updates. So that is really it. It's all I have today, and I'm hoping it was helpful. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was brilliant and extremely interesting. I really appreciate that. We do have some questions if you're up for it. A very interesting question. What are your thoughts on what the figures would look like if 811 wasn't mandatory in the US?
Wow, that's a great question. I guess I would say that they would be substantially higher because, I was around long before 811, and it was just so hard to educate people effectively, especially contractors working in different states had to know a different number and the different rules. So, I couldn't give you a best guess, but 25, 35, 40% higher at least, I would guess.
Okay. What do you think, and this is an interesting question, in your presentation, you've covered a large number of strands of different things. There's a network of ways in which you're getting the message across. So what do you think is the most effective thing that you do in the USA that we can learn from in the UK? The thing that gives the biggest bang for the buck, if you like?
Yeah, that's a tough question too, because, there's obviously the face-to-face training that all these one call centers do is phenomenal, because, doing it through media is really great, because that gets to homeowners and things, but getting out there face-to-face with the actual excavators is really huge. And I'm seeing more of a trend here to train the trainers, because it's so much time is spent trying to train what we would call boots on the ground, the person with the shovel or running the backhoe.
Yeah.
And while that's important, it's just not really sustainable. We have to get to the people at that company who are training their people and get them on board. I really think you have to create a culture of damage prevention within each company. If you do that, the problem really solves itself, but it's not easy.
Who funds the 811 centers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it varies a little bit state to state, but they're typically nonprofits, and they're funded by their members, either through a cost per ticket, or sometimes they'll just look at their operating costs for a year and divide that up, lots of times based on how many miles of cable or pipe. So they try to divide up the cost for operations in the fairest way possible. In other words, based on who's using the system the most, what utility has the most locates, and things like that.
Okay. This is an interesting question. Does central national government intervention help or hinder safe digging in the US? Or how helpful or proactive is national and state government on the whole issue?
Again, kind of interesting. You'd like to think it helps, maybe, but honestly, we work so closely, especially with Rhino, with the markers and things, with pipelines. You know what? They're doing everything possible to not have their pipelines hit. A, because they actually care about safety, and B, because of the financial risk. So I'm not all that sure that the legislation really makes a big impact, and it only affects pipelines. We don't have really any legislation regarding damages to telephone or water and electric. And here we have less participation in damage prevention efforts in general, with water utilities and electric utilities. Now, some are active, but I just say in general, they're the least active people.
Okay. Somebody, you mentioned you've been to many international conferences and looked at practices elsewhere in the world. Are there any practices elsewhere in the world that you would like to bring back into the US that it's not been possible so far?
Interesting. In Australia, here the utility is responsible for the locates. In Australia, the contractor is, and when you really think about it, the contractor is the one at risk.
Yeah.
They're the one who is going to get sued. So pushing the burden back down onto the contractor seems to make a lot of sense to me. I don't know that could ever happen here, but it seems to work pretty well down there. They don't really have very many damages.
Okay, well, that's great, Scott. We really appreciate your time. We're running out of time. I need to hand over to Richard now. Before I do, can I just, while Richard's on, if people can still answer the poll in the discussion forum tab, that would be really useful. But I very much appreciate your time, Scott, and it's been really interesting. Thank you. So over to Richard.
Thanks very much, Bob, and thank you very much, Scott. I was personally just a bit disappointed that you're handing over to me, because I was loving hearing those questions being answered. So I'm sure everyone else was as well. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for all your time today. We've had a great response rate, and a lot of people that have joined today, that at least over 90% have stayed for the entire duration, which is something we were concerned about, but being really, really grateful to you all for hanging around, and you'll have seen from having Scott's presentation at the end there how useful it's been to hang around. Just a few thank yous, really, and thank you to the exhibitors for all their time and efforts in making sure that they were here. I know you haven't had to lug those heavy boxes up and down stairs and in and out of vehicles, but I hope it's been useful. I really have to say a special thank you to the speakers. Virtual rounds of applause aren't particularly effective, so we can't show our appreciation in that way. But for their time and effort putting those presentations together and all the content that they've delivered, it's been really, really, really effective today. And I've also really appreciated the honesty that each presenter has given, that we've seen really warts and all approaches, and just, as I say, just an honest view of what the situations are. It's not a glossed over issue. It's really good to see that, because it helps everyone understand that there are areas that we can all improve in. Please do get in contact with us and tell us what you found worked, and what worked from the day and what you got out of it, because it helps us shape the agenda for next year. We've got a lot of work to do now to take all the feedback session notes, all the breakout session notes, and put them all together, and we'll share them in the usual way. So yeah, again, please share that far and wide, because the more people we can get to from this day, and all the information that is provided, the better. To leave it on that note, on learning from the US and all those things that have happened, and great to see, Scott, as we look at you as in the US as someone that's got it all sorted, but it's great to see that you're open as an individual and as a country to look at different ways of how other countries do it better. So really collaborative and nice way of approaching. I think just to finally say thank you very much to all the team here at LS Bud and supporting teams for all the facilitation, all the putting the agendas together. And Bob, thank you very much for your chairing of the session, as well as thank you to Speakeasy for putting on the conference and all their backroom support. So I think all that remains is for me not to forget, as usual, about the car park code, or to wish you a safe journey home, as I think you're already there in most cases, but just to say thank you very much. And what we always say, to stay safe. It's particularly relevant to this at the moment, but thank you very much again.